At its heart, the ritual is about four men re-encountering themselves and their ancestry in the otherworldly light of the ancient Nordic woods. The film is an exploration of multiple contemporary themes, most notably failed masculinity.
But it's the common ground that the filmmakers find with the audience in terms of, in this movie, it's all about, failed masculinity, which we talked about quite a bit.
Yeah.
And the loss of friendship, particularly male friends, and the loss of respect amongst your peers, particularly like friends that you were tight with when you're early 20s.
But it also calls into question pre-existing notions of expressions of male grief, heritage, inheritance, responsibility, maturity, and duty. Heritage and duty are hinted at subtly by Dawn, and these themes are also referred to overtly through Norse symbolism. This rune, symbolizing heritage, property, and inheritance, serves as the film's most prominent symbol. Furthermore, this rune is employed by the film deliberately to bring about questions of the propriety of the inheritance of masculine roles. There are a slew of other symbols present within this film. There is this symbol, used during the ritual, which stands for protection or submissiveness, which the village people use to serve the beast in the woods. There is this marking on the woman, which appears to be an ancient swastika, symbolizing the triumph of light over dark and eternal life over the death. And there is the statue of Loki. However, according to the director, the main theme of the film is masculinity, and perhaps contemporary men struggle to adopt the roles that they feel society expects of them. Therefore, Luke's failure to defend his friend is at the centerpiece of this drama. In my opinion, this story is a tale of a confused man who runs from adopting traditional masculine roles, but is nevertheless compelled to confront them. Luke eventually triumphs in maturing and accepting his duty as a man, while both rejecting conventional norms and honoring his ancestry. Like Luke, I believe the director is questioning the role of masculinity in society and addressing the angst of many young men during a trying time politically and culturally.
In their late 20s. How do you define a traditional male, and how did you determine that the last of their kind is now that old?
I think a traditional male is holding on to the traditions of patriarchy, and especially the traditions of the negative patriarchy, the traditions that says the man has the right to be the dominant, to be the force, to be the power, whether that power is governmental, financial, or physical.
And you've described the first wave of internet natives as a generation that is dismissing customary gender definitions and saying future men are a more evolved species.
As we come to know the group, we understand that Luke is much different than the rest of the characters. After the pub, only Luke wants to continue drinking, while everyone else seems to have responsibilities. Rob is married, as evidenced by his ring. Hutch has a wife and children, and Dom is a successful businessman with a wife and children as well. What's more is, Luke appears to have disdain for this type of masculinity. He refers to Dom's life as a family man with contempt. In this way, Luke appears to have rejected typical expectations of family, honor, and duty. The differences between these characters becomes most evident in the wake of Rob's death. This comes to a boiling point when Dom confronts Luke about the night of Rob's murder. Phil, Dom, and Hutch believe that Luke was cowardly in not having defended their friend, that Luke had a duty to act. It becomes clear that Luke's friends harbor resentment and believe that Luke behaved cowardly. Luke is left struggling with this question himself. This main question in the film, which tortures our protagonist, most likely serves as a reflection of the conflict in many young males today. The director mentions that he was examining male friendships which began during one's 20s. Luke's regret and failure to take responsibility for his actions, coupled with his confusion with societal norms, symbolizes the struggle of many men of this age. It is precisely in this spirit in which Rob had originally envisioned the hike. Rob mentions that he wanted to prove himself by challenging himself during the hike. The hike itself can be interpreted as a trial or ritual which, upon completion, proves one's manhood. In fact, the director mentions the character's lack of challenges up to this point.
I also wanted to write on another level about men of my age, men of my generation there, because I was struggling to find books about my generation of men, and we're a curious generation, is we kind of live almost outside of history. Most of us have never been to war. We haven't lived through Great Depressions or influenza epidemics, and to put these sort of men outside, who lived outside of history, and their concerns are mortgages and careers and IT and so forth, depression and what your role is and how do you be a man, etc. put them in a situation, a historical situation, where they have to live on their wits.
Scandinavian and Norse mythology and its influences sit at a stark contrast to these effeminate men. It is no coincidence that, ultimately, it is the ultra-masculine themes within Norse mythology that are challenging our group of characters. It's as if the characters' Norse bloodlines have come back to haunt them. When Hutch brandishes his map, it is revealed to the audience that they are in Syrinx National Park. According to ancient texts, Syrinx is said to be home to the ghost of an illegitimate child. It is later revealed that the woods are being haunted by a Jötun. Ancient Scandinavian texts suggest that the Jötun were sent down to Earth to ease the pain of people too devastated to cope with it. The monster is described to be a bastard child, which has been abandoned by its parents. Although far-fetched, it might not be too presumptuous to interpret this monster as a symbol for the loss of guidance that comes with losing one's parents to divorce or circumstance. That is, the Jötun itself is a creature which has been abandoned itself. As such, the creature will, quote, not let anyone leave, as if to avoid being abandoned again. Each of the characters that perceive the Jötun is blinded to its grotesque true form. The monster is able to examine the hearts of men and understand them in order to judge them worthy of its mark. Unfortunately, the people that are bestowed the privilege of bearing the mark must serve the monster in exchange for unnatural life. The act of kneeling in front of the Jötun is similar to the stance and action of Luke kneeling or bowing during his friend's murder. To bow in front of the Jötun is to bow in the face of our fears and deepest griefs. As characters went unnatural extended lives cowering in front of the Jötun, so did Luke win a longer life cowering in inaction in the liquor store. On the other hand, each other man in the excursion became a sacrifice which protected the others. Throughout the movie, there are many examples of so-called failed masculinity and the clash of masculinity with femininity. In an article dubbed Men's Failed Masculinity, the writer declares that there are only a few emotions that are deemed suitable for a man to exhibit. There are many examples of this type of behavior within the film. The director may be stating that Hutch's refusal to back down and not enter the woods led these characters to their terrible outcome. In fact, in several scenes, the characters refuse to sufficiently reason and instead blindly continue. Luke continuously tells Hutch that the group should retreat from the woods to no avail. First in the cabin before the nightmares start and after. Dom refuses to follow the compass and instead treks on the path of civilization. This can be interpreted as a masculine failure, or the failure to think critically instead of drudging forward recklessly into situations. But Luke begins transitioning from being passive to asserting his will onto the situation. As the story progresses, Luke becomes emboldened by the circumstances and emerges as a leader of the group. In direct contrast to Luke, Phil is by far the most agreeable character. He is terrorized by the effigy upstairs, and he quickly succumbs to hopelessness in the woods. The director states that he is the most susceptible to otherworldly influences.
And then Archer Alley has this really, really smart sensibility where he's kind of able to stay above things, and Phil, who seems, who is, I think, the character who ends up being most susceptible to the supernatural elements.
Phil is also constantly seen on his knees. It is likely that Phil's unmanly qualities are what is making him so susceptible to the Nordic supernatural influences. That so, it is dubious as to whether the monster is selecting its targets in any order. That is, there is no discernible pattern to how it chooses to take its victims. However, there are some qualities in Hutch that are not found in the others. For example, Hutch seems to be at the least disturbed by the nightmares, while Phil, Luke, and Dom suffer much greater. Hutch is also the de facto leader of the expedition for the majority of the hike. He holds the compass and map. Perhaps the monster was drawn to his strength and took him first.
You know, Robert James Collier was, he had a thing with Hutch that was very much like, there's a lot of camaraderie in what he was trying to do. He was trying to do it for his friends, you know, which could have been played in a far more typical fashion.
Furthermore, though Dom seems to be the most effeminate man, he truly is the most responsible character in the film. Perhaps Dom is the type of man that the director believes we should be. Dom is bad at hiking. He complains comically about his meniscus. He calls an Uber after the pub. But also, Dom has the courage to tell Luke how he is a failure in the group's eyes. He honorably refuses to leave Hutch's body behind. He is continuously reminding the characters to keep their heads calm and reason logically. Finally, Dom tells Luke that he must burn the village down and escape the woods. The conflagration of the houses of enemies is common in Norse mythology. It is a strategy used by a particular hero frequently. It is likely that Dom is symbolically reminding Luke of his duty to act, though Luke has up to this point not fought, but ran.
It's going to be like, Sam Troughton brought a moral authority to Dom that I didn't quite see coming, that really anchored the movie in a different way. And
one of the more mysterious parts of the film is the scene with the mummified corpses. It appears to be arranged like a church, with the leader in the center. These beings are likely the very old remnants of the first people that inhabited the cursed town. The entities do not speak to Luke when he enters upstairs, but when Dom entered, the undead bodies seem to come alive, taunt and intimidate him. Why would the cursed mummies take an interest in Dom, which they did not take in Luke? The English-speaking woman tells Luke that he was chosen because of his pain. It was pain that Luke had not been able to cope with that saved him. Ultimately, it was this pain that would enslave him if he would succumb to inaction as he had done before. Most likely, it was this pain that spared Luke from the wrath of the mummies because he was just like them. He was an entity destined to live forever and cower and crumble into just what these mummies were. It was only through action, not mourning or grieving, that Luke was able to move forward out of the woods. Norse mythology is replete with tales of hypermasculinity. It was a precursor to Christianity. Nordic tradition was originally a system that prescribed the roles of males within society. As invaders brought about Christianity, these traditional values were superseded. The director is likely hinting at a similar shift in paradigms of masculinity that is occurring today, as evidenced in the final sequence of the film, with Luke picking up the old Nordic axe, symbolically brandishing traditional masculine roles in order to destroy this part of himself. During the harrowing final sequence, we see Luke screaming in a mixture of savage grief, perhaps finally being able to grieve for his friend and find his own way of becoming a man.